ethics. It's great that you are here. Welcome, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Now we begin with the second day of our symposium, Climate Change and Ethics, and we begin with a presentation by Rainier Ibana. Dr. Ibana is a professor of philosophy at Ateneo de Manila University in the Philippines, where he teaches ethics, environmental ethics, and teaching philosophy. He has been involved for quite a long time in debates on climate change and ethics. For example, he was a member of UNESCO's COMEST, the World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, and the chair of its working group on environmental ethics. He also served as a primary educator of UNESCO's MOOC on climate justice, coordinated the Asia Pacific section of UNESCO's philosophy manual, and most remarkably, he is the current president of Philosophy for Children and Youth Network in the Asia Pacific, which is really remarkable, I think. I am so happy that he agreed to speak at the symposium, even though for him, it is late in the evening right now. So this is really amazing that he agreed to speak. The title of his presentation is Reducing Greenhouse Gas Emissions, Lessons from the COVID-19 Pandemic and Biology's 10% Law. So it's your turn, Rainier. We are all looking forward to your presentation.
Hello. Good evening, and thank you for coming. It's an honor and privilege for me to be able to share these ideas. So I've been working on these ideas for my classes. I'm teaching 2 courses in environmental ethics now. So I invited my students, they're here. Yeah, my class Bidal is here, not Nicole. And I invited my sisters also and my mom. So I don't know if I will see their names. Let me share my screen, because what I will do is read my paper and then show you some pictures from the footnotes by way of just like my power slide presentation. Okay. Okay, that's the title of my paper. There's something being recorded by the host or participant. Can I take that out?
You can close that.
Okay. So it's about greenhouse gas emissions. I was asked to write a paper for Routledge, but that's the title they asked me to do so I just developed that in terms of the COVID-19 and 10% law. I suppose you have read the abstract, but I guess I will read it again because it's different from the text anyway. So I would like to present some lessons that can be learned about the reduction of greenhouse gases and the human being's relationship with nature from the confinement of human populations during the COVID-19 pandemic. The ascetic lifestyles imposed by the government's policies of lockdowns and quarantines minimized transportation costs, supported local economies, and relatively cleared the atmosphere from harmful pollutants that cause global warming. Aside from the formulation of negative injunctions to mitigate consumerism, however, carbon sinks that absorb waste products were cultivated by those who tried to cope with their internment by composting and gardening their surroundings. These lessons confirm biology's 10% law, or I think in the paper I will also argue that 10% law confirms some of these lessons, which states that consumers can receive only 10% of energies from lower feeding levels, while excess energies are released to the environment as entropy. When governments were caught flat-footed by the pandemic, civil society organizations, and this is where I will focus my paper, composed of the energized by discursive citizens, tried to meet the basic needs of the marginalized sectors of society by initiating community pantries and shared gardens that mediated the needs of both the urban poor and their rural counterparts. I understand that this also happened in other countries, not only in the Philippines, because, well, I'm editing a journal which I invite you to write, called Budhi, and there are many contributions there about this from India, from Australia, from where else? Oh yeah, from different regions of the Philippines, even about how civil society organizations were able to uh, initiate community pantries and shared gardens. Their creative models of human development offer an alternative future governed by mental forces of anti-entropy. I use the German word there because it's quite difficult to. What I mean by geistig is it's not just the brain; it's a spiritual act. It's a spiritual activity to be able to coordinate these dynamic forms of equilibrium. No, it's led by the spirit, by the mind. No, it's not. It must be led by the mind, and it does not just happen automatically. It happens in nature, but if we are going to direct it, the intellectual powers of the human being must intervene. No? So I call it anti-entropy because it fights against extractive institutions and their enablers. No? That are primarily motivated by the accumulation of power and money. Anti-entropy optimizes the inherent power of nature according to the thermodynamic laws of conservation and conversion of energy. These laws govern biology's 10% law, but they can be clearly illustrated by transposing the Taoist image of the relationship between yin and yang to the symbiotic relationship between human beings and the natural world. So that's the summary of my paper. Okay, for the content of my paper, let me just read the introduction. When human populations were confined to their homes during the COVID-19 pandemic, a significant reduction of GHG emissions were observed in China and the USA. Right? Those were the only countries that have documentation, but I think in general, even here in the Philippines, the air was cleared from all this not really just pollutions, because we had a volcanic eruption before that, so you also have sulfur. No? Although these emissions are expected to return to higher levels as the pandemic is contained, lessons can be learned from this experience. We shall explore 3 lessons that include: number 1, the shift of consumption patterns from the global to local contexts. Number 2, the institutional mediation of civil society in the alleviation of the sufferings endured with those who are adversely affected by global disasters. So I'm talking about global disasters in general, but by the pandemic in particular. But by global disasters, it could be human-induced climate change disasters. No? And the critical role of individual persons in the practice and advocacy of the reduction of GHG emissions. I might not be able to get to that, no, but anyway, that was my original intention. When confirmed and supported by biology's 10% law and the laws of thermodynamics, these lessons can be universalized and applied to other endeavors or even other fields of interest, no? Such as writing a paper, no? I think. So my first section is from globalization to relocalization. Relocalization is a special term that I will explain later. In NGOs as intermediary organizations. The global scope of the COVID-19 pandemic severely affected the transnational movement of goods and services. Instead of the physical transportation of people and commodities, trade and commerce shifted to the electronic media in order to contain the pandemic. Aviation costs were reduced as airlines were grounded to the extent of bankruptcy. Food consumption were localized as fresh products were preferred over preserved ones. Since extending the shelf life of commodities were no longer necessary, using plastic wrappers and containers were minimized. In many places in Southeast Asia, namely Bangkok, in Chiang Mai, here in the Philippines, of course, we've been doing this. Traditional packaging materials such as banana leaves were reintroduced and became more popular in the wet markets. Even fast food chains introduced paper wrappers and environment-friendly products. I'm sure you know about this. No? I don't have to mention these global fast food chains. As the pandemic continued unabated, however, people started to cultivate their own gardens, partly as a means of coping with the mental health problems generated by the prolonged confinement to their homes. Those who did not have the luxury of cultivating the soil around their surroundings repurposed plastic containers and burlap sacks. They found vacant lots to use as community gardens. Urban populations migrated to the provinces where access to food and nutrition were more available. These demographic and consumer patterns reduce the gap between consumers and producers as consumers become producers themselves. I think that's a very important line because there you are cutting out the supply chain, and that's where all the money are coming from, all these middlemen. No? Government lockdowns and social distancing measures, however, prevented people, even at the local level, to trade their goods and services. Non-government organizations, in partnership with enterprising motorcycle riders, took this opportunity to mediate the commodities of rural producers and urban consumers. Some grassroots people's organizations even organized barter trades to exchange their surplus products for other commodities that they did not have. I do not have the footnote for that, but I refer you to one of the issues of our journal, Budhi. Relocalization became a deliberate, and I quote, strategy to build societies based on the local production of food, energy, and goods, and the local development of currency, governance, and culture. Instead of the canned goods and dried noodles afforded by government institutions to assist indigent communities, NGOs and POs, people's organizations, were able to provide access to fresh food that strengthens the immunity of disadvantaged populations. These organizations took further steps to provide community pantries and community kitchens to provide for those who lost their livelihood and sources of income due to the government-imposed lockdowns. Let me see. Individual citizens' initiatives and people's participation. I think this is the third point I mentioned earlier in the introduction. These NGO networks would not have been possible without the initiative and participation of individual citizens who took it upon themselves to implement and manage the mediation of resources from those who have resources to share on the one hand and those who badly need them on the other hand. Community pantries, for example, and my friends in Australia said they also had this, were governed by the principle and slogan posted on every pantry. Share what you can, get what you need. This is, of course, both in the Acts of the Apostles and in Mark's critique of the Gotha program. The virtue of gratitude flourished. Those who shared what they can were thankful for the opportunity to give, while those who needed these resources were thankful for the gifts they received. Realizing that these pantries will not be sustainable without being grounded to the soil as the source of food and nutrition, community gardens were developed by neighborhood and parish organizations. The upper classes, endearingly referred to as plantitos and plantitas, this is in our language, it means aunts and uncles of plants. So their children are cousins of these plants. So some of my students said they have a lot of cousins. Initially cultivated exotic plants at the start of the pandemic. When they realized that COVID-19 might take a while to subside, they started cultivating edible plants not only as a means of feeding themselves, but as a way of distributing resources to those who needed them. Okay, now this is my problem. I would like to show you some of these. I hope I don't get lost. Copy, good. Let me see. Some of these community pantries, they were in Google. Google. I can't do it. Well, I'll do it later. I don't want to get lost. I'll show them to you later. For impoverished communities, gardens became a lifeline. NGOs initially provided seeds and technical knowledge to enrich the soil and to cultivate edible plants for their own consumption. Now these communities are proud of their own achievements. I think I can do this now. There's a footnote there. I practiced this already. Go to the page. There. So this used to be garbage dumps. They live in garbage dumps, and they have this, and so they have cultivated. These are, I think, eggplants. No, I don't know what these are. No, eggplants also. I'm not sure about this. My sister also has a, in their community. They also have these community gardens. No? I don't have pictures of burlap sacks and bottles, but I have them upstairs. I have my own community. I have my own individual garden. No? But let me see. Okay, so that should. They might have some burlap, yeah, bags here and plastic, even. Okay, so these are some of the NGOs who taught them how to do it. No? There, maybe you have some. Yeah, these are some of those bottles. No? Okay. Okay, I have to go back, get back to my paper. Is this the one? This is the long version. Let me see. Go back to my paper. Let me see. I'll just go back to the. I have a longer version of the paper. Like I just cut it down for presentation purposes. So let me see. I'm in footnote 5, I think. Yeah, footnote 5, and then I have to go now to there. Community kitchens also sprouted within urban poor communities. These were brought about by non-government organizations who gathered raw materials from people's organizations in the rural areas and cooked the vegetables within the communities themselves. The members of these communities were more than willing to assist in distributing food to those who needed them. No? Yeah, I can have pictures of those. I will show them later. Confirmation by biologists, 10% law, and the thermodynamic laws of transformation and conservation. So let's go to the theoretical part. These stories of mediation can be universalized and applied to other domains of knowledge, such as climate change, when confirmed and supported by the scientific laws of the natural world. Foremost of these laws is biology's 10% law, which states that as consumption levels increase, only 10% of energies are consumed by feeding levels. Vegetarians, for example, consume 10% of energies from fruits and vegetables, while carnivores absorb only 1% of the energy consumed by herbivores because their consumption was mediated by the feeding level of other carnivores. So if you have vegetation of 1,000 joules of energy, the herbivores or the vegetarians will get 100 joules, while the carnivores will only get 10 joules of the herbivores. So it's actually only 1% of vegetation, no? And the other carnivores, if they eat the carnivore, they only get 1 joule of energy. The problem is the rest of the 90%, the rest of the energy gets out of the system. This is the feeding level, no? As entropy, and they have to be absorbed by carbon sinks, or they have to decompose so that it can go back to the soil, and then of course the soil will generate the energy for the plants through photosynthesis. No? It's of course the primary energy here is the sunlight. No? Thich Nhat Hanh, who just died, he's a Buddhist, a Vietnamese Buddhist who founded a community in France. No? Once said that the roses and garbage are interbeing. by interbeing, they have a connection to each other, a relationship to each, and that interbeing is actually entropy, because the rose will eventually wither and feed the soil, and the soil will feed other roses. No? So that's what he means by interbeing. Sorry if I always cite all these Asian philosophers from editing UNESCO's Asian section of environment of climate. What is that now? Asian South-South philosophical dialogues. No? Another statement by Thich Nhat Hanh that is interesting is he said, the sunlight is embedded in the very fiber of the paper that you are reading. No? Why? Because of the sunlight again. No? That was used by the plants. No? That became paper. No? But what is most important here are the worms, the soil, and other producers. They are the producers. These are all consumers, but the producer is more foundational. I didn't have the footnote, but it was Holmes Rolston in his book on international policy of climate change. I don't have it. I don't know if I have it here. Is the one who said that he talked about intrinsic, systemic, and other values, but he talks about foundational values, and he says the soil is a foundational value. These feeding stages, the ones above, are called trophic levels. This is Moles by he has a book on ecology. Since only 10% of energies are absorbed by each feeding level, just go down again. The excess energies that were not absorbed into the pyramid become entropic. So they degenerate. Entropy refers to the degeneration and decay that accompanies the emergence of order. This is order and life, but then you have chaos outside. From within an ecological system. These emissions of excess energy must be absorbed by other ecological systems such as carbon sinks, trees, and other vegetation. Or vegetation. Absorbing the heat emitted by consumers reduces the temperature of the environment and consequently mitigates global warming. Increased consumption due to overpopulation must be accompanied by a broader resource base. Increasing levels of consumption emit more heat to the environment. Higher levels of consumption also happens when the rate of extraction from the resource base are intensified by mechanization, such as what happened during periods of industrialization. Or, well, we now talk about different waves of industrialization. We are now in the fourth wave. The supply of energy within the system must likewise be reinforced in order to support heightened levels of extraction. So if you keep on, like this laptop, this probably came from the black sand in my hometown. So the entropic consequences of consumption, however, are not explicitly accounted for as liabilities of production systems. I was a business major when I entered the university, so I know about this accounting. Natural resources are merely considered as inputs without consideration for the chaos generated around the surrounding environments. But environmental degradation are actual hidden costs that must eventually be paid for by others. These payback mechanisms could take the form of environmental disasters and climatic imbalances such as global warming, droughts, flood, melting ice caps, and sinking islands. So how do we suspend entropy? How do we prevent chaos? Conservative practices of human beings and NGOs have shown that they can deliberately delay the process of entropy and support life's flourishing by systematically intervening with the feedback mechanisms that link the network of nature's producers and consumers. So I think systems thinking is in the vogue today. That's how it's done. You look at the systems and look at positive and negative feedbacks. feedback mechanisms. This can be achieved by means of three simple but interrelated lifestyles: living closer to the ground, cultivating carbon sinks that absorb carbon emissions, and enhancing the productive capacity of the soil as the foundation of life. Number one, living closer to the ground means consuming fresh products that have more nutritious value in comparison to consuming products from higher feeding levels. Vegetarians, for example, absorb more energy than carnivores because they directly consume nutrients from plants instead of mediating their energy resources through animals that originally consume vegetation. It also means living according to the cycles of nature by reusing recycling materials that have already been gained from the natural world instead of extracting new ones and throwing them away to the garbage can. No? Extraction and transformation of energies, as we have seen from biology's 10% law, heightens process of entropy in the environment. So when we recycle and when we reuse materials, then we conserve energy. No, this is just thermodynamics. No, because when you throw it away and it has to degenerate or it doesn't degenerate, or when you extract minerals, then you transform energy. And again, when you have energy transformation, since energy is fixed according to the first law, then you expel excess energy in the form of heat. Again, according to the second law of thermodynamics. By planting more vegetation and cultivating them in such a way that symbioses are created between the organisms in an ecological niche, an equilibrating dynamics, this is progressive tense, equilibrating, between oxygen-producing organisms and carbon dioxide emissions can be established. This effort can be complemented by injunctions against burning forests and fossil fuels as sources of energy. And the example I have here is the rainforest being burned in Indonesia and Borneo to make room for palm oil. And you can see, sometimes I show pictures of orangutans fighting these machines that are destroying the forest. So every time we use cosmetics and preserved goods that have olive oil, we are contributing to the destruction of rainforests. The fulcrum point of this equilibrating dynamics can be measured mathematically for each consumer of electrical energy. The Manila Electric Company, for example, has estimated that one mature tree can absorb 48 pounds of CO2 per year. These estimates are printed on our monthly electric bills. Yeah, I have my electric bill here. I consumed 2 trees last month, 36 kilowatts. So I have to plant 2 or more. At the bottom of these efforts to conserve energy is enhancing the productive capacity of the soil. Composting biodegradable materials that enrich the soil is therefore a foundational value. And there, I should quote Rolston, but this is not yet for publication anyway. It will require consumers to segregate their wastes from non-biodegradable materials in order to return the biodegradable ones to their source. This alignment of lifestyles with our efforts to eventually to protect the earth is really what it means to support the project of the so-called integral ecology. And I cite there Pope Francis. So alignment of lifestyles, because you have to eat vegetables to feed your compost that will be given to the soil and the plant. So if you don't eat vegetables and fruits, then you will not have anything to compost. So of course, fish bones are also good for calcium. But on the plants. So anyway, I think that's a very important insight. That when you do composting, you also become fruitarians and vegetarians because you need the peels. These activities can be classified as spiritual, as I said, or geistig acts Only humans can do this. Animals are immersed in their environments. They cannot choose and create alternative habitats beyond their ecological niche. On the other hand, even God and the angels asked for a woman's permission in order to pave the way for the course of salvation history. So, I always explain to my students how it's important to see ourselves as embodied spirits. We are spiritual, so we can do deliberate acts, but at the same time, we are embodied, so we are limited. But that's a plus because that means we can do something about animals, plants, and the earth. No? We can redirect it according to our chosen interest, no? Or common goods even. No? So let me then conclude. The interactions between humans and their environment can be illustrated by the Oriental yin and yang that symbolize a dynamic form of equilibrium. Depicted as two complementary dark and light parts of a circle, it shows how harmony and balance can be achieved by seemingly opposite forces of the universe, male and female, negative and positive, hot and cold, humans and the natural world. These dualities, however, are inadequate illustrations of what I mentioned earlier, a dynamic relationship between the poles of a spectrum. Each point in this continuum are indiscrete shades and admixtures of the different elements that constitute it. These moments contain many parts that constitute the whole, but the whole is more than the summation of its interacting parts, even if the identity of the whole is influenced by its parts. But as Ralston argues, there's a downward influence also. The whole influences the parts. No? The taste of soup or coffee, for example, is distinct from its ingredients, but its mixture creates a distinctive flavor that differentiates it from its parts. That's how you have brands, no? Like Nescafe or whatever kind of coffee. No? There's a combination of mixtures inside the package. No? The human being's relationship with nature, therefore, is not linear because we are dynamic participants within the broader context or network of life itself. Okay. Let me stop share because I think I lost my shortened version. Okay, there's something in the chat. Oh, the community garden. Okay.
Thank you, Rainier,
Stop
for
sharing
this
now.
great presentation.
So if you want to, yeah, sorry, let me stop share. Okay, good.
Thank you
If
very
you
much
want,
for great
if you want,
presentation.
okay, if you want the pictures, the images that I showed, I can send you a copy of the paper once I have polished it. No, because right now I wrote it, just this morning. I have a heavy teaching load, so I can only work on weekends.
That was a really fantastic presentation, and it really made a great bridge to what we talked yesterday about. What can individuals do here? Isn't it? Is it just governments that can do something, or is it individuals who can do? What can individuals do? And I really like your 3 points, like living closer to the ground, cultivate garden sinks, and enhance the production capacity of the soil, and that you phrase this as a spiritual act or a geistige activity. I mean, this is really, I'm German, by the way, so the concept of geistig is really something I'm familiar with. So something we can choose intentionally. That is our choice that we can do because we are persons. We have mental capacities, and we are not just bound to us being biological. I mean, this is the concept. So thank you very much. We now have time for discussion. Everyone who has a question or want to comment somehow, please either raise your hand and unmute yourself or type something in the chat. I'm sure there are lots of things we can talk about, and we could even perhaps put some of those links to the photos in the chat, isn't it? Kelly has done so with one of those images already. So everyone, Go ahead, Kelly.
Oh, Dr. Ibana, do you want me to just include all those links in the chat so they can see the images?
Sure. Yes. Yes, please. Thank
Okay,
you.
I'll do that. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to go back because I might get lost.
So, I mean, maybe I begin until we see questions from others. So what you basically suggest is, I mean, we could do those things. We were able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions during the pandemic, isn't it? And why don't we continue doing these things? Why don't we move forward, kind of learning our lessons from this and continue doing these things? Have gardens, have community gardens, think more, you called it living closer to the ground, which is, I mean, this is also about, this is about a lot of things, isn't it? This is not just about gardening. Basically, this is your suggestion, isn't it? Because at least in here, we can see that people go back to normal, isn't it? And a lot is done as it used to be before the pandemic.
Yeah. Living closer to the ground also means walking or cycling rather than using automobiles.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. So we have a question from Andrew. Thanks for the very nice talk. I also strongly support community gardens and ran one for 15 years. One concern I have is that calorie-producing plants like wheat, rice, and corn need a lot of land area. Have you had success in growing calorie-rich plants in urban areas? That's a good point. That's a good point.
Calorie-rich areas in urban areas? Yeah, let me just follow up what you said. Yeah, I agree with you, especially rice. Here in Asia, everyone eats rice, you know. But to produce rice, you need irrigation, a lot of water. And sometimes you can have problems with the flooding and saltwater intrusions. So, but we have upland rice. So I think that's an example. We have upland rice, and it doesn't require water. But these are indigenous varieties. You know, it's a whole world. It's not just a thing. No, it's not just a product. So they say this so many colors. Black rice, red rice, brown rice, you have different kinds, colors. No, the more colorful, the more nutritious it is. No, but they are planted with rituals, and indigenous peoples, or even peoples in the uplands, are very secretive about it. No, and of course it's very expensive also, and they have rituals when they do this. It doesn't require water, to plant or a fertilizer. No. So we have these indigenous varieties, and of course we are protective of this because we have seen bioprospecting problems when people patent our indigenous products, and then we have to buy from them because they own the patent. No? So yeah, we do have those nutritious or high calorie products in the uplands. Sorry about urban areas. I haven't been to one, but our university has declared that it will become a Laudato Si University, which means that we will be exposing our students to the natural world. And we suggested that in our university, we should start planting, because most of the plants in our university are decorative. We're plantitos. Plantito means we have exotic plants instead of plants for consumption. So we are on the way to what you wanted to do. I think it's but I think in Asia in general, we have very high. I mean, when you walk along the streets of the city, you see mangoes on the streets. It's raining mangoes this summer, so it's not a problem, I think. No, Yeah, we do have a lot of fruits now, no? So I
I mean,
just got some dragon fruits.
I
So
understand.
can you clarify? I hope I answered this question.
Sorry for interrupting. I didn't want to interrupt you. I understood this question also like saying, you know, in agriculture, we have a lot of machine. We need a lot of ground to produce all of this. How can we do this in in cities? But I have to say, I mean, in Chicago, there are a few community gardens too. Chicago is a big city. There are these small community gardens where people volunteer to garden. And I mean, you may say, okay, this is not a big, I mean, they produce some vegetables, some fruit, but not a lot for sure. But it is a beginning. It creates also in big cities, it creates regions with plants, with natural habitats. And also it may raise awareness in people what it means to garden, to cultivate things, to live closer to the ground, to use your words, Rainier. Insofar, it may have some effect beyond the mere, I mean, the mere producing of, let's say, a
Yeah.
certain amount of vegetables and fruit, even the producing of vegetables and fruit is, I mean, they produce quite a bit of vegetables and fruits in these gardens.
Can I respond? Can I respond a little on this?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, I quite agree that urban gardens are very valuable and supplement diets in very important ways, and have grown up during times of conflict and poverty and pandemics, at least around where I live. I really appreciate sort of the flavor and different way of formulating these issues that you're doing in the Philippines. That's very enlightening. Around here, we talk a lot about regenerative agriculture and restorative agriculture. And most people who have studied comparisons between, say, natural and organic, human-based larger farms versus industrial farms have found that they're more or less equally productive. So it's a very promising line of thought, not only for cities, but for the basics of wheat and corn and rice as well.
Yeah, wheat and corn and rice, you need a lot of land, agricultural land, exposed to the sunlight, you know, so
Yeah,
it's difficult.
yeah. One of the problems is Václav Smil argued that if we didn't have fertilizer inputs from fossil fuels around the world, we'd lose food support for about a third of the poorest population of the world. But people who've studied these things closely think that that the more natural approach can actually, and you know, doing the recycling and composting can do much more than you would immediately think.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines that I throw out to my students is that you can make soil. You know, it's wonderful to have this compost bins. You know, it's very simple, just a can, and you throw your you know, your biodegradable materials there and a few worms, and you have soil, fertilizer. You know, and that's high grade carbon. You know, that's really very. I garden upstairs. You know, I live in a condominium, and so my student, when I talk about this with my students, they call me a ninja gardener because my neighbors don't know what I'm doing. No, so on the roof deck, I cultivate tomatoes, patola, all kinds of, even some fruits, you know, like passion fruits, from plastic bottles. You know, that I ask from, you know, plastic bottles. You cut it in half and invert it. You know, like a 10-gallon. I have some. I can show you. And you put there your compost, and it doesn't matter how small your container is. The important thing is you have high grade carbon. No, the soil. No, if the soil is very rich and powerful, you will have. I eat fresh. I pick fresh tomatoes for breakfast. No, from this I have pictures, I can share. But every morning I that's what I get, when I look forward to that because of the sunlight. You need vitamin D these days. So it energizes the body and the soul and the spirit.
Yeah, that's true. Let me read what Kathleen wrote. But Andrew has a good point in terms of calorie-rich food. Perhaps converting usable land for food that can be grown successfully in urban areas and at least limit the amount of land converted to agriculture would be a start. Yeah, I mean, she is right. She's right with this. Yeah, it could be a start.
Andrew has a good point in terms of calorie-rich foods. Perhaps converting usable land for food that can be grown successfully and at least limit the amount of land converted to agriculture.
Yeah.
Limit the amount of land converted to agriculture would be a start. What can I ask about it? Limit the amount of land converted to agriculture.
Yeah, I think this is related to what we have talked about. This is a good point, Kathleen. I want to broaden this. You also talked about relocalization in a broader context, isn't it? This is not just about gardening. This is about all kinds of having things locally, having things relocalized again. So maybe in the 4 or 5 minutes we have left, we can talk about, or you can talk a bit more about your thoughts on this. What else is there that can be relocalized?
Well, power of the government can be relocalized. Like we're now talking about, well, we have a local government code which says that a big amount of taxes should remain in the locality and not sent to the central government. So that's part of it. Budgeting for the local initiatives. Local education also is very important. If I may divert from climate change and food production, that students learn if their subject matter come from their locality. They learn better rather than, like when I grew up, A is for apples. But that's really colonial, where we only have apples for Christmas. But yeah, so in education, you can apply that. In budgeting, you can apply that. This localization. Well, we have a special issue of our journal on relocalization, and we have contributors from India, from Japan, actually, there's a system that we adopted here from Japan. It's called the Decay System. It's when consumers themselves contract the farmers to produce organic food. They are willing to pay more as long as you produce it correctly. And so they subscribe. It's by subscription. You pay ahead of time. You don't know what you're getting because it's seasonal. Because seasonal food actually is better than all this mass-produced, stored in some container van. But yeah, so it's called community shared agriculture. Here in the Philippines, we have adopted the Decay system from Japan. Community shared agriculture, where you have, like I have a basket every week. I subscribe 400 pesos every week, and I get a basket full of vegetables and fruits from the mountains. And I don't know what's going to be there. That's the problem. You have less. You don't choose what you get because it's seasonal. It depends on what is available in the farms. Unlike when you go to the grocery, you make your choice, but you don't know whether they were grown organically, or you pay. It's tagged as organic, but you pay more. But it gets transported. Now you have. But whereas this one, it's fresh. So it's called community shared agriculture. We assure the farmer that if they plant organically, they will have buyers. So they are not susceptible to changing market prices.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you very much, Rainier, for this really inspiring presentation, and for your thoughts, and for these examples on gardening and showing us how to do it, actually being a role model, isn't it, for doing this. Thank you very much. We have a 5-minute break, and then we begin with the next session, session 3, on human connection to nature. And I would like to remind everyone that in this session, we have 15 minutes per presentation. And that is, if speakers have 15 minutes for their individual presentation, but it would be great if speakers reserved a little bit of this time for questions and answers, for direct questions and answers, for after we will have these presentations, and after all presentations we have a general discussion. But it would be good if you spoke a little bit shorter, so that for your individual presentation there would be a chance for people to ask a few questions. Okay, so let's have a short break, and let's reconvene at 8:55 and begin with session 3. Again, Rainier, thank you very much for your presentation. And maybe those who have questions or comments, you can type them in the chat, and we'll forward your questions to Rainier so that he can answer them, and we'll post them on the Ethics Center homepage together with his presentation. Thank you very much, Rainier, and thank you for joining us and giving this presentation in your late evening. So have a good night. Thank you.
Okay, I'll stay for a while. Yeah.